Lingua Brutalica is a podcast that uses ethnographic interviews to study language use in the extreme metal community. We are studying a music scene known for its love of themes and topics generally considered offensive, and it is likely that some episodes will touch on topics or opinions some listeners may find tasteless or ethically problematic. Ethnographic researchers aim to adopt the interviewee's point of view so that we can draw out and study the attitudes, beliefs, and practices that are important to them. We want to make it clear that in presenting these conversations here, we do not endorse any of their content. Our aim is to explore the thought processes behind language use in this long-running, international, and yet understudied scene. Hey everyone, welcome back to Lingua Brutalica with me, Jess Crook, and my co-host, Wes Robertson.
Hello.
In this episode today, we'll be discussing the lyrical choices of Jason Netherton of Misery Index. Thanks for being with us, Jason.
My pleasure.
So
Wonderful.
Just to start out, as we usually do, how would you introduce Misery Index's music to someone who has never heard the band before?
I usually say, first and foremost, it's kind of, it's extreme metal. Most people these days know what that means. I guess we're a death metal band at our core, but we definitely take a lot of influence from punk and hardcore and grindcore and that kind of spirit of things, and kind of inject it into this type of death metal we do. And I usually say, yeah, most people know death metal, and if they're familiar with the scene, I can usually cite Napalm Death or something like that as a primary influence, and people kind of get it. So
Encyclopedia Metallicum lists you as a death metal / grindcore hybrid. Are you vaguely okay with that kind of classification?
Sure. I grew up on heavy metal, and then I kind of progressed towards the more extreme end of things like thrash and speed metal, and then death metal. So when we talk about our band, I definitely think, yeah, we're a death metal band. Some people have called us death grind, citing those kind of influences. Like early on, we kind of wavered in some instances towards more, the grindcore side of things. And definitely this, kind of socio-political content of the lyrics, or reality-based lyrics, as I call them, kind of like have a, put us on in a certain kind of category within death metal, which has more tradition, as I said, the Napalm Death kind of side of things, that Brutal Truth, those kind of like bands which talked more about everyday struggles and issues and things like that, rather than having the kind of fantasy based horror kind of gore lyrics that are found in a lot of death metal. So it's just kind of that's kind of where it is, I guess.
And so what drew you initially to the kind of more extreme end of metal, even as just a listener before you became an active kind of creator in the field?
Just as a teenager, at the time, I was always just looking for the next, boundary pushing kind of transgressive thing that would, capture the imagination as being like something next level, above and beyond like the, what had already been established with heavy metal. And for a while it was speed metal and thrash metal, but then I heard some of the first death metal bands, and that kind of really captured, my attention or whatever interest. And then later I kind of discovered punk and hardcore and things like that, and that kind of rounded things out for me. But yeah, it was just a gradual, wandering into trying to find new things that were just like next level and pushing sonic boundaries, pushing the boundaries of what the human body could do with the drums and the throat, vocals and things like that. So that's really, I guess, it's a path a lot of people have taken to get there. But
you got into punk and hardcore after death metal?
Yeah, I was a firm metalhead kid, growing up in the 80s and 90s. So it wasn't until the late 90s when after maybe 10 years, I was in Dying Fetus for 10 years playing this kind of like brutal death metal. it was what we loved to do. It was kind of like, it was what it was. It wasn't anything going to be anything more than what it was, a kind of technical, brutal hybrid. So, towards the end of my tenure in that band, I started writing more socio-political lyrics and kind of gave it that identity there. Mm-hmm. And that's when I started, I found out about things like, in the tradition, like the early stuff, like Dead Kennedys, to, later in the 90s, bands like Disrupt, His Hero Is Gone. It's kind of like more in the crust punks side of things that had these really angry, visceral lyrics that were rooted in, everyday life. And it was just sounded like they were angry for a reason, rather than in a lot of death metal bands, like Cannibal Corpse or something, which obviously on the surface sound, absolutely angry and pissed. To me, there was something more, I don't know, authentic about the way that punk and hardcore would like scream about, a lot of everyday struggles and things like that, economic struggles, things like that, which were, had more of a truth element to them, which attracted me. So that's definitely what punk and hardcore kind of brought to the table at the time.
So were you not too enthralled with death metal lyrics then initially? Was it kind of punk that got you interested in lyrics as something to pay attention to?
Well, when I started taking the lyrics seriously, I loved, the heavy metal lyrics that of certain bands in the 80s that were really, captured the imagination, but it was more like fantasy stuff. There's one band called Holy Terror, 2 albums out in the late 80s, and that their lyrics by a guy named Keith Dean, the singer at the time, and they were like groundbreaking for me. This just kind of really captured the imagination. But I guess, I don't know, and I like the death metal lyrics that we were doing, in Fetus during the 90s, but they were just empty. They were just, placeholders for the sounds like that we were making vocally. But they were just kind of mindless, the kind of gore and violent stuff that seemed to be well suited to the music at the time. And, and a lot of that too, like the music was trying to push the boundaries and say, what's the most extreme thing you can say, and shock people, like that would, kind of match the brutality of the music. And of course, Cannibal Corpse and others were kind of forerunners in that. And then, the other type of subgenres of death metal, which like pushed it even more to the extreme, like gore grind and stuff. But yeah, I never really, it wasn't until like, the late 90s when I discovered the hardcore and punk stuff. And also it mirrored like my own kind of like self edification, where I was in life then. I was getting to my mid 20s and wanted to start screaming about other things that were more meaningful to me than just fantasy based kind of violence, gore stuff or whatever. So that's what happened.
Right. Well, given that you said that, like, metal lyrics can encompass this kind of quintessential fantasy-based, like, violence that we all kind of hear about, particularly with regard to, like, death metal, right? But can also equally kind of treat subjects of sociopolitical importance, just like you were discussing, right? Do you think, given this kind of variation, it's possible to pin down what makes lyrics kind of quintessentially or identifiably metal as opposed to non-metal?
In the traditional sense, yeah. If you say heavy metal, you immediately think like the big, I don't know, there's that kind of sort of sword and sorcery component or something, or the the Man of War, or those kind of things, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, just singing about these kind of themes that are kind of like, I don't know, about unifying the metal masses and all that, and sticking together, and there's a kind of like community component to there with all that. And those would be, when you think of heavy metal, I think those are the kind of somewhat, I guess, generic tropes you see.
But do you think of like, you had like 2 sets of lyrics, like one from a metal band, one from a non-metal band, do you think you'd be able to pick which is which?
Not anymore. There's just so many. Metal is just so fragmented now. There's so many subgenres and niches and different types of metal, and and it's really just covering everything. So that's why, I mean, there's everything, you know, which has been labeled metal, like from, you know, across the spectrum of doom metal, black metal, psychedelic black metal, you know, anarchist black metal, to different types of tech death, other things that, you know, that might center on themes of science fiction and, you know, and technology and, I don't know, singularity kind of themes or something, you know, that you could just read the lyrics and it just wouldn't relate at all to like, oh, this is a heavy metal kind of song. And especially like our lyrics, you know, with Misery and Next There, it could very well be, you know, on a punk or hardcore kind of record or something that's more of a, you know, in that kind of genre. So
you mentioned that you prefer or you enjoy sorry, maybe to rephrase, you were looking for a while back lyrics that had a bit more kind of honesty to them or kind of real life feel. Is that something that is possible, you think, in songs about like zombies or space or murder? Like, can you sing about the traditional death gore stuff in a way that is true to life in a way, or is it always a bit fantastical and kind of, you know, entertainment-ish?
yeah, I mean, there's definitely a thread of, or a type of lyric writing. I guess it kind of started with maybe Carcass, maybe who, you know, had these like very literal kind of clinical pathology kind of takes on like, you know, science on medical themes, you know, that are, you know, I guess maybe it was an attempt to elevate it out of the comical, but and show a more reality based, because it was often coupled with, you know, this collage of imageries of like surgeries and stuff. And so, I mean, there is a kind of component there. And, you know, I guess it's ultimately just what people want to get out of it. If people are looking for something more substance in their lyrics and they find it in something that they connect with, some people, it might be, you know, some of the themes of nature, you know, and that, you know, are in a lot of black metal or something that connects with them, and so on a spiritual level or something. But for me, that I just happened to find that, you know, kind of honesty in or authenticity, if you will, of trying to find lyrics that match the you know, the extremity of the type of music we were playing. I found that in those kind of, you know, in everyday life kind of themes. So I always thought there was a much, you know, horror in everyday life you could talk about and pull the cover back on and talk about, rather than dwelling on serial killer themes or something like that. But
Well, of course, this is kind of a question of taste, but do you think you can say like what makes for good metal lyrics versus bad metal lyrics for you personally?
yeah, I liked, if it works, I like lyrics that work well with imagery that have a sense of like, you know, painting a kind of picture to like, you know, like giving like, which, you know, construct a kind of like image in your head as you're reading them about something. Or, and I often like lyrics that rhyme. To me, that like the use of wordplay, use of metaphor, like allegory, like all these kind of like literary themes, if that's in there, that's like excellent for me. You know, I grew up reading, like, you know, I like a lot of the classic English poets and reading like Coleridge and things like that. And I strongly like the wordplay and the use of a really good rhyme. and sometimes you know, I know people write lyrics that don't rhyme, and I like those too, but sometimes if it's that extra like touch of like the effort of trying to make something that captures the imagination and, you know, in a convincing way, that's the main thing.
So before we jump into asking you about some of your lyrics, because a lot of these features you mentioned that you like obviously appear in the lyrics that you write, we just wanted to ask broadly, since we've never talked to anyone who's had as long of a career in, you know, extreme metal as you, and just if we reflect back to when you started writing lyrics compared to when you write lyrics now, can you see any changes in how you approach lyric writing, even in like just the way you do it, or the words you use, or kind of how you get the words into the music? Or is it kind of has been the same sort of process throughout your career?
Yeah, it kind of, I have a system now and an approach. The music's always written first. When I write a song, I do have kind of lyrics in mind, but maybe when the other guitarist writes, they don't really think about the lyrics. So it's a little bit harder to write lyrics to those songs because they're not structured as I would have them, like thinking about the lyrics the whole time. But usually, yeah, I mean, it's definitely gotten harder, and I think we're 7 albums in with Misery Index, and we have our themes, and it's definitely a challenge to like find new things to talk about. Or I mean, I've been looking in recent years, there's a lot of upheaval in the world in different places, and during the Trump years there was a lot to talk about there as far as being like a post-truth era that we're in, and the idea of truth was like a theme in the last album. So yeah, and the album before that, Killing Gods, that was probably the moment we reached the most outside of our comfortable wheelhouse, in the sense that we did a half the album as a kind of reimagining of Faust, and a kind of talking about it in a modern sense after I read a book called All That Solid Melts into Air by Marshall Berman. It's like a take on the political and economic changes under modernity through the 20th century. And he used Faust as a kind of, I don't know, like an allegory or something to explain like how modernity's, as the first kind of like story about a modernist kind of take on things, about how anyways, we use that theme as to tell a story, like a 4-song kind of take on it. But I actually didn't write the lyrics to that one. The guitarist Mark did the lyrics to that one.
Okay.
So, but anyways, that was like us stepping out. That's as far as we stepped out, I guess, in one way, is to go into that more poetic kind of take on things, rather than just, okay, this song's going to be about the international labor supply chain and how it's very exploitative, third world workers, or something, which is always a theme of mine, because I've always been interested in labor, and that's like the one thing that's always kind of permeates the lyrics.
Well, your answer now is just like segued really nicely into the questions that we wanted to ask that are more kind of specific to your lyrical content. And as we dive into this, I think it's good to kind of start with a discussion of your band name, because for those listeners who might be unaware, your band's name, Misery Index, is actually the name for a particular economic calculation created by North American economist Arthur Melvin Okun in the 70s, I believe, whereby you add the unemployment rate to the inflation rate to assess the level of economic distress experienced by the general population, right? And if you look at the lyrical content that stretches across your 7 albums, as you've said yourself, it seems like, the band name really gives you a pretty good indication of what you're going to get in terms of the band's thematic foci, which includes, those kind of class struggles, capitalists, like wage slavery, dissidents, and these kind of overarching failings of modern capitalist society, right? And this all kind of ties into the, human labor that you were talking about. So given that you have one of the largest kind of music catalogs that we've seen on the podcast, as Wes was mentioning earlier, we wanted to kind of begin discussing your lyrics by first asking you kind of what brought you to this theme, and what kind of like keeps you coming back to this theme so consistently, because you said that, labor is one of those topics that permeates all of your work.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're correct. I mean, the name of the band did come from that economic indicator. I know when you read about it, it just sounds so boring, especially for a band, a metal band or a death metal band, which is, ultimately entertainment, I guess, in the end. But yeah, that's where it came from. It also came from a band named Asuk, whose second album was called Misery Index, and they had a big impact on me musically and lyrically as well. But yeah, I mean, it just goes back to, I guess my own kind of like working class roots. You know, I came from that kind of a background, like I'm a family. I was in you know, at different periods of my life. I was in the union. I was a union plumber for a while. Um and did other kinds of like work like that, construction, and it always kind of resonated with me, you know, like asking the bigger questions about you know, who benefits from this and why certain systems are set up the way they are. And it was just like there was basic kind of like questions about, you know, what is best in life and who's, you know, benefiting from it, who's being exploited, and and that's kind of what would carry me through. And as I, you know, I got older and read more about it, and of course I, you know, read my share of Marx and others, and that kind of stuck with me. So when it came time to, you know, writing lyrics to this music, and you know, I was looking for something that kind of, you know, that I could be up on stage, like, you know, if I'm going to be screaming about it every night, I want it to be something which really is meaningful for me, and I could say it with conviction. So those themes naturally kind of worked their way into the lyrics, and through the years, they've maybe been some albums and statements have been more, I don't know, extreme than others. I remember there was a kind of phase when I was more interested in anarchist philosophy, anarchist syndicalism, and things like that. And around 2008, the Traders album, I think, is kind of heavily spiced with those kind of themes. And at the same time, I never felt like I really wanted to like shove it down people's throats or hammer it over their heads. So I like to use I get to use language which kind of just like sets a tone or presents an idea rather than saying, do this, and that, you know, blah, blah, blah. So that's just kind of been my approach through the years, and it's worked for me, I guess.
When you first
I don't know
started
if that
writing,
answers your question.
oh
Yeah,
no,
absolutely does.
absolutely.
Yeah.
When you first started writing these kind of politically charged lyrics, you know, that was a very different time in the history of death metal. Did you find it difficult to, you know, jump from, as you were saying, the kind of, you know, just songs about violence or songs about murder and zombies to political ones? Did you have any, like, was there any kind of pushback that you encountered early on, or even, you know, just even later in your career, but I imagine more earlier on, when people like, you know, this is death metal, you can't have those kind of punky lyrics, you can't, you know, politics like that shouldn't belong in death metal. This is a, you know, this is a genre for songs about, you know,
Fantasy. Yeah.
fantasy and slaughter.
Kind of, you know, death metal was actually born out of a kind of merger of, you know, what was happening in the UK with the grindcore stuff and Napalm Death and Extreme Noise Terror, you know, Carcass, like these kind of like early bands there, which came out of the punk scene and actually had, you know, lyrics which were kind of more, as I say, just say reality based. It kind of merged, you know, with what was happening in the US and Sweden and other places, and it kind of created a space where I remember distinctly in the late 1980s that the music is what mattered, and the subject matter would often, at the time, there were bands like, you know, that were talking about the gore stuff, but there were other bands like Bolt Thrower who were singing about war. There was Terrorizer, you know, just who was in the kind of the Napalm Death, like singing about, you know, songs like multinational corporations and corporation pull-in and all that. And it just, I mean, it didn't seem like there were any rules. So I remember the first like two Dying Fetus, the first Dying Fetus record, those themes started to creep in, but it wasn't like totally the main idea. And I don't remember there wasn't any pushback from my bandmates or anyone else. You know, everyone just focused on the music for the most part. So when I started having, you know, these kind of themes were creeping in the first album, Purification and Violence, and the second, Killing on Adrenaline, it was kind of like it just went along with the music, and nobody said anything. And so I felt pretty comfortable by the time Destroy the Opposition came out, 2000, which is very much on the surface like pretty clear, like political record, death metal record. And there wasn't anyone that was sort of like, hey, what is this about? You know, this and that. It was really just about the music and the riffs, I guess. And the lyrics were kind of, and the imagery were kind of secondary maybe, but I've never heard anyone complain about. There are people like through the years that have said, well, I don't want to have politics in my music or something, and that might be too political, but it's been few and far between. So I think death metal's always been pretty open to like whatever kind of lyrics you want to talk about, for sure.
Okay, so it was more of kind of a natural progression rather than thinking kind of like, all right, stop, I'm going to do something new that kind of feels like a risk.
Yeah, it was a slow move transit. It wasn't like, oh, one album was like really only with Dying Fetus, really only the demos were total like gore. I think the first album even started having more like everyday kind of horror reality stuff themes in it. So at least in my own personal lyrical like journey through the years, whatever, it's after like by that time it wasn't any looking back. But what really hammered it home was like I said, the late 90s kind of discovery of punk and crust punk and grindcore and those kind of like more explicit approaches to political lyrics.
And was it kind of difficult at all to come back to kind of similar subject matter across different releases? Because I mean, you've mentioned that, of course, there are differences in how you've kind of treated subjects like, labor, given that, you've had interests in like anarchist philosophy at particular points in time that's like influenced the way you've written lyrics. But in general, though, do you feel like any pressure to kind of continually bring a new kind of perspective or approach to this issue? Or is this kind of not really a concern for you?
Yeah, it's always a challenge to keep things kind of fresh, but there's no shortage of like woe and ills in the world to bring into the lyrics in some way or another. I just try to keep to use, like I said, a lot of imagery and metaphor and really make them interesting. I still think though in general that death metal is always about the music first. And I don't ever really get a lot of people asking me about the lyrics or even saying much about them. It's almost always about the music. I mean, reviews that I've seen, it's like, okay, it's just, I don't know, maybe it's just people are a little bit inured to it, or at this point, it's like, okay, we know what they're going to be about or something, or I don't know. But I try to keep it interesting, and it's important to me. And I guess there are people out there, maybe who people have told me that they like the lyrics and they're meaningful, but it's not like it's always like the music. If you see reviews, or it's always they talk about the sound, the riff, the production, the record. It's like those are the main things that seem to be the driving interest.
I mean, is that disappointing for you at all, given that, like, if you read your lyrical content, it's very clear that you've put a lot of time and effort into building these lyrics that, incorporate a lot of like interesting wordplay and very, modern and relevant subject matter. Yeah, is it something that you'd rather, I suppose, like hear more about in interviews and stuff like that, or like, in your conversations with fans and stuff? Is it disappointing to, I suppose, not have this effort recognized?
Yeah, I know that people have told me through the years that it means, and so I write to please myself, and then if I'm happy with it, and I put it out there. I know there is some people out there that do read them and might spark some ideas or might resonate with them in some way. That's very meaningful. I just know that in this genre that the music is always like the main thing that captures the feeling they get from it. So, and it's, and of course, because we're screaming, we try to enunciate the words as best we can, but ultimately, we are screaming them, so they aren't the most easy to decipher. So from the early days, death metal vocals have always been a kind of like an additional instrument in the band. There's, the first two Obituary albums didn't have any lyrics. It was just John Tardy up there screaming sounds and enunciating like, pseudo words. There wasn't any lyrics. There's a few other examples I can't remember right now, but that's like the perfect example of how death metal vocals were just this like additional layer of like, I don't know, tonality or whatever, or melody on top of the guitars and the drums. So it's always been that kind of struggle, I guess. But you know, that's what the lyrics are there for. And the lyric in the lyric booklet or on the record. And even, you know, and I remember even as a kid in the 80s, like reading along to the lyrics, that, you know, you couldn't understand them, everyone, even when they were singing them. So
yeah.
I don't know.
So does this mean the lyric book kind of like serves as like an additional text, like of, you know, like an Easter egg, if you like, for like fans that are willing to make that additional effort?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. To me, it's like, yeah, if they want to take the extra step and they want to read the lyrics and they something about them, like, you know, draws them in and makes them connect with what we're doing even more. That's great. That's why I do it. You know, it's frustrating to me because I know when you read lyrics, when someone has a really good band, but they don't take the lyrics seriously, so they just write whatever put anything in there. It's like the kind of typical themes and same words or something. That doesn't work for me. But the lyrics are important to me, and the bands that do have good lyrics are bands that I connect with, I guess.
So you mentioned the use of kind of themes and imagery, and one image that we sort of noted throughout yours is a lot of references to Christian religious imagery. So like from your first EP, Overthrow to Complete Control, there's frequent references to angels, demons, the devil, crucifixes, crucifixion, testaments, rites, hymns, churches, chapels, altars, prophets, preachers, shepherds, flocks. In some of your songs, you talk about biblical cities like Gomorrah and Babylon. And there's more overt references to Christian mythology, like in the song Conquistadores of Discordia, which has lines, as infidels in Eden's garden will tear out the serpent's eyes, or the song Ruling Class Cancel on Traitors, which features the line, open up the seventh seal and watch the West decay, being the final symbolic seal in the apocalypse myth of Revelations. Is this something that you're kind of, when you think about your lyrics, a theme you're aware that you keep going back to? Are you intentionally drawing on this kind of Christian imagery? And if so, how does this imagery kind of support your exploration of politics and class issues and things like that?
I think a lot of those things just provide really good material for, you know, talking about some of these themes historically, and just I mean, this resonates. It's just something which I find to be useful, like as an expressive way to talk about some of these themes. And, you know, I mean, they're not necessarily, I wasn't trying to be like religious about it or anything, but I just like a lot of the weight. It just carries a lot of, I know, a poetic kind of heft or something, which kind of I connect with. And yeah, I don't know. It's just,
Well, what do you mean that? Why does
Christianity, for example,
sorry.
I mean, for the Conquistadors one, that was just a kind of way. That was a way of talking about how at the time, you know, a lot of what the extreme right was doing in trying to, you know, demonize Islam was kind of mirrored a lot of what extreme Islam was saying about the West, and they were kind of like two mirror entities. And I was talking about that historically, about what happened during the Gulf War. But yeah, sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, just I guess you mentioned that these have weight. Why do you feel that they have? Why do references to Christianity have poetic or weight in that way, do you think?
Oh, I don't, and it's not necessarily Christianity. I guess some of those themes, but I see them more as historical themes rather than specifically religious. You know, these are like some of the grand myths of history, which are, you know, transcend a lot of different religions. And I just, you know, I've the seventh seal thing, and I always thought that was kind of a, you know, it just conjures up a great, you know, a powerful image of like a finality of sorts, or something that
yeah, for sure.
It wasn't intended to be like a any kind of take on Christianity, or I know it's a Christian theme, of course, in the Bible, but
Well, I mean, there certainly are other references beyond those that are drawn specifically from Christianity in your lyrics, because, there's images that reference Greek and Roman mythology that, again, kind of stretch across your releases. There's Greek gods and beings like Styx, the goddess of the river Styx, that is the river between Earth and the underworld. In Unbridgeable Chasm from Retaliate, and Black Sites from Traders. So there's Medusa, of course, from the Medusa Stair of Discordia. There's Narcissus, who's a hunter, son of the river god Sisyphus, and a nymph who is particularly known for his beauty, of Pandemicon of Discordia. There's Dionysus, Gaia, personification of the earth, Minerva, Roman goddess of wisdom, and Cronus, Greek titan and the god of time. And it's also references to other gods too. I think there's there's the spear of Osiris, of course, on Decline and Fall. So yeah, I suppose, what do these references to mythical beings add to the songs? I suppose, like, speaking more broadly beyond the context of kind of Christian mythology.
wow, it's so interesting to hear you like list them all, because I never thought about it, like through the whole 20 years of lyrics, like all these things are like but yeah, I mean, like the religious themes, they just have this kind of like, I don't know, eternal resonance. Like they root things, they ground things, and they're powerful themes. I mean, I think Minerva, that's that was from something I read. I think it was Hegel who said the owl of Minerva spreads its wings at dusk. It's it's this kind of idea that as a civilization reaches its apex, that it's once it becomes aware of its what's accomplished, in a sense, it's already in decline. So it's a lot of those broad civilizational kind of themes, historical themes, are like what I'm most interested in, like where we are in history, and how specifically modernity and postmodernity, and how just the everyday themes of like basic things like wage labor are kind of like rooted in these broader historical themes of the growth of capitalism and its spread, and how it concentrates power and wealth in different areas, and rather than talking about those mechanistic kind of everyday mundane themes of power and struggle, it's more interesting to me to like couch them in this kind of historical language to give like a kind of broader perspective. And I like to draw on some of those mythological, or because a lot of these kind of themes also have interesting parables and myth and religion. So it's just a way of wrapping it in a more kind of interesting lyrical presentation to kind of, I don't know, give it some imagery and maybe elevate it, and so it resonates with people more, with kind of those things they can connect with. That's really what it is. It's I just I look for those kind of figures in history and myth to sometimes like talk about some of these modern themes in a more historical way.
So I mean, you got like the religion, the history, and the modernity. Like, is in your mind, is kind of religion and history sort of intertwined, and like, I guess, is the modern connected in being an extension of those events and stories, or?
Well, yeah, religion is one aspect, but for me, it's the economic. That's like the main sort of engine of like modernity, is like how the trajectory, the growth of a certain economic model, the one we're under now internationally, is kind of brought us to where we are today. I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but
well, just like so Osiris, or going back to say Medusa or Gaia, these old gods, how do they connect to the current system in a way? I guess, how do we learn about the modern through these images of the past, I suppose?
Well, a lot of them are kind of connected with these kind of parables and stories of basic humanistic themes that I don't know which or it's, timeless in a sense. And I think it's important to kind of always have those kind of themes in our heads, so we have a good understanding of not only what's going on around us, but to have a good a basis from which to make good choices and judgments concerning values and ethics. I think there's a lot of understanding about the mechanics of things these days, especially with how powerful like media is, and how easy it is to spread ideas and disperse them. But at the same time, there's not really like a strong ethical kind of component to understand and make better decisions about how to deal with some things like technology and media and things that are coming at us so fast. So I guess I'm subconsciously drawn towards some of these more eternal, timeless kind of mythical stories that talk about things like ethics and in different ways to try to kind of ground some of the things I'm talking about in the lyrics. I don't know. It's something I've never talked about like in this way, so kind of like figured it out myself. But it's usually I just sit down and kind of write, and it's just kind of a process of sorts. But it's nothing I'm super self-reflective on, I guess.
Well, beyond some of those more timeless historical references, that are embodied in those images of mythology, there are also a large number of very specific references to historical events and related kind of political ideologies, particularly those of relevance to the US. So on your album Traitors, you make reference to John Brown Patriots, Thomas Paine, and on Heirs to Thievery, you mentioned the Monroe Doctrine, which was introduced by President James Monroe in 1823, where he warns about European nations that the US will not tolerate further colonization from puppet monarchs, as well as Manifest Destiny, which is relatively well known to the US context, that suggests that the US is destined by God to expand its empire across North America. And then even more recently on Rituals of Power, you reference Necrocene, which is the slow emergence of the crisis of negative value accumulation and thus extinction through capital. You also frequently reference specific wars, military occupation and colonization in the US and overseas, like the song 7th Cavalry off Heirs to Thievery, which references the Wounded Knee Massacre of Lakota people in 1890, the Spanish-American War, which stretches from Cuba to Manila, on Heirs to Thievery. So yeah, what is the intent behind including all of these quite specific references to America's history and geopolitical impact, in addition to these more kind of timeless historical references in those, religious and mythological images? Yeah,
well, I guess in an effort to kind of balance out the lyrical subject matter of each record, it's always, maybe it's like the young Iron Maiden fan of me that kind of looks back at a historical kind of event or something and kind of writes something about it, whether it's like the Trooper or the Charge of the Light Brigade or Rhyme with the Ancient Mariner. I always found kind of like a good balance for a good record is to have, like, at least for me, is to have like some songs that deal with the past or some that deal with something that's happening right now. And Heirs of Thievery in particular was a record which was almost entirely kind of rooted in a reflective review of sorts of certain events in American history which are kind of swept under the rug, by sins. If you read People's History of the United States, it's a kind of like alternative history where kind of dissects all the the unpleasant events in American history that they don't really teach in schools, because they're not really to tell the truth about it. There has been a kind of movement, I guess, in the last 20 years to kind of talk more about those themes and some of the the things that happen to minorities in the US and other instances. But for a death metal record, I thought that at the time in 2010 it came out, it was a good moment to look back, and that those themes were Seventh Cavalry is very much about what happened there at Wounded Knee, and the song Heirs of Thievery kind of encompasses a lot of that. And Traders, some of that, I just read biographies of John Brown and Thomas Paine, so that's how they kind of make an appearance at that on that at the time. So yeah, I mean, it's I always try to have something like that, or something that's kind of interesting take on something. So it's definitely made its appearances.
I mean, you mentioned earlier that you do hope that people have read the lyrics and you like that some of people have come up to you and talked to you about the lyrics. Do you view in kind of telling these stories yourself in a way as like an educator? Like, is death metal a way to keep stories that maybe societies don't want to tell alive?
It could be. Ultimately, I just want to have lyrics of substance that have something meaningful for me and for people to read about. And if it does have some kind of educational component, or cause someone to say, oh, this is kind of cool, and they actually go and like maybe go on Wikipedia and read more about it and learn something about it, that's even better. I mean, I'm under no illusions or anything that one like death metal band's lyrics is going to somehow like educate the masses or whatever, because ultimately we are just entertainers. We play music, and we play live shows, and we make music for people to listen to, when they're driving down the road, or when they go to the gym or something. So, but yeah, I mean, we are beyond that, I guess we are kind of artists of sorts, and that's just the way I feel comfortable expressing things, and it's worked for us so far, and it's allowed us to kind of carve our own like niche in the death metal scene that where people know about us, and then they know that this is what we're about, and and I don't think there's too many doing kind of like this take on it, so I feel pretty good about that.
Well, I can certainly say, as an Australian, I had to look up quite a lot of these references, and you certainly educated me on a lot of American history through that exercise. So, on a very small scale, at least, you've educated one person.
Maybe I'll have to delve into Australian history in the next album and spread it out a little bit.
There's a lot you can do.
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, similar situation of a lot of suppressed history. So.
You mentioned that some of these political references came from like books that you were reading at the time, or recently around the time you wrote the album. And we actually noticed that you also have references just to fictional literature as well. For instance, a line, Blaze burns. Excuse me, I just lost the ability to speak there. A blaze burns in Vonnegut's eyes appears in Gallows Hammer off the Killing Gods, which is obviously a reference to Kurt Vonnegut. The song Weakener suggests maybe I'm deranged, a Herbert West inside of me, which is a Lovecraft character from the story Reanimator. There's an excerpt from A Gilded Age by Mark Twain and Charles Dudley Warner that begins Administer the Dagger, the first song off your latest album, Complete Control. And the song Complete Control mentions Caliban, which is a half-human, half-monster enslaved by Prospero in Shakespeare's The Tempest. And Rites of Cruelty details myopic pawns marching out to Rattenfanger's Call, which is the origins of the Pied Piper story from, say, 13th century. Given that these references are quite fleeting, like very few are central to a song, kind of what impact do they have on the overall message, and how does where do you see the role of literary works within kind of your lyrics as a whole?
Well, to me, it's kind of like this. That's like the hot sauce. That's the spice that that allows me to color things. Is like, especially when you draw on those references, like, it's just what comes out sometimes. I mean, sometimes it's just like it's about the imagery. When I say something, marching up to Rattenfanger's Call, it's like that conjures like an image. It's like, oh, what's that? And you actually kind of see this visual of like, the Pied Piper or whoever. I don't know. It's and the Vonnegut reference. That song is about the kind of elevation of irony to a kind of like, I don't know, a point of where it loses meaning. I can think at the time, what was it? It was 2014. Yeah, it's like that's what I find interesting. Like those literary kind of references are like little, I think you said earlier, like little Easter eggs that maybe if someone was reading, they're like, oh yeah, or kind of, which adds another layer of like depth to it. Hopefully, maybe to someone who's reading them, or but yeah, it's important. All those kind of things kind of come together to kind of,
Okay. I don't think we've had a hot sauce metaphor.
Yeah.
Reference, but I get it. Like I totally vibe with it. But it's an interesting image.
And this is correct. I never spoken so much in my life about lyrics, so this is kind of the first for me to think through some of these things like self-reflectively. So
is this the goal though? Like,
it's why it's a little. It's why I know it's why a little bit of stutter and start here, because I'm trying to think about it like in a different way. But
yeah,
I mean, that's what we go for. That's what we're
absolutely.
looking for, yeah.
A lot of times I write it, I just write them, and they're on. They go on the track, and in some cases, I don't really think about it again. If it's like a track we never play live, it's just kind of like there, and it's like it exists, but it's not really in my mind anymore. It's kind of like it was just something I put out, but
I mean, it'd be weird, I think, if you knew the answers to all these questions, like just right off the bat.
Especially considering it's been a while since you've written some of them. So
we're asking about 20 years of music almost here. So if you're like, oh yeah, here's the exact single reason for this. I know that, and I still remember, that would actually
incredible.
Be kind of frightening in a way.
Yeah, I mean, some of them I know well, and they're like still some of my favorite. I mean, Ghost of Catalonia on Traders, that's something I wrote after reading Orwell's Homage to Catalonia. Talks about the Spanish Civil War. Those, some of them were more literal and to the point, and other ones are definitely more abstract and just kind of, maybe I don't even know what I was talking about. I don't know, it's just something that came out, and some of those references ended up in there. But
well, this is one of the interesting things about your lyrics I found, like, going through them, is that, you can see the kind of core themes, like, quite visibly, on first inspection of the lyrics of any given song. But then, like, there are kind of these layers that come up, like, through the references that you've added that kind of add more and more nuance. Is that something that you're intending as an effect for, those readers that do want to do that extra work, that, they'll, if they want to dig below the surface, there's something that they will actually find?
Exactly. I think that's what it is. It's like, when I reference Vonnegut, it's like, oh, well, maybe someone look that up and they'll go read Slaughterhouse-Five or something, or and just find out about something, or just seek. I remember it was the same when I was a kid in the 80s. I would be reading lyrics and there'd be a reference to something, like, what's that? And I'd look it up and I'd follow the path to trying to, I went out and got a book of Coleridge's poetry, and I read the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner after the Iron Maiden had a song about it. So I guess it's just something that I'm passing along, I guess, or reimagining through my own writing. So
kind of speaking of the balance you have here of the direct message and then kind of the wrapping of the hot sauce, if you will, we also noticed that if metal has sort of two stereotypes of the kind of heavy metal, welcome to the jungle, girls, kind of very, very simple, straightforward stuff, or the carcassy, I'm a native speaker of English, but I have no idea what these words mean, sort of difficult things. Your lyrics seem to kind of go back and forth between these poles in a way. Obviously not to the Motley Crue kind of stuff, but just in terms of like straightforward, terminology. So, for instance, if we take the song Infiltrators, the first stanza is, behind concrete walls, the worst among us hide. Once more, they will know what it means to live in fear. Make them fear like 1945, which, again, these are all words that, the average English user would recognize, even if they're in a more poetic way than they speak in day to day. But the immediately following stanza is fence walking pawns, separatists, apologists, all entangled, cross burning cops, catechists, loyalists, fascist agents, life sucking laws, corporate craws, reprobates, rot the system, shit talking frauds, charlatans, hypocrites, drawn and quartered, which contain larger words including catechists, which I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing right, reprobates, charlatans, which again would not be, say, common in day to day speech. Is this mix of the relatively everyday and the uncommon intentional? And if so, how do you get this balance between the simple and the complex when you're working on your lyrics?
Well, I guess I don't know. First of all, I approached that song because it's basically a 2-minute kind of hardcore song. It's just a really, has these kind of stupid riffs or just really chunky, heavy riffs. And it's just it's kind of like an intro we had laying around, which we turned into a song. So we just had the idea to make it kind of like a straight ahead kind of, anti-fascist kind of anthem of sorts. And I approached it like that, a lot of straight up tough guy hardcore lyrics or something, pretty straight up, you can't keep me down. This is gonna be, I'm gonna make my way, like kind of.
Sure.
So I just kind of had that for the start, and of course, like when trying to encompass all the different dynamics of I don't know, the where power is concentrated in modern society, in law enforcement and in the church and government, I don't know, in the media. It's like, okay, what's a good one word kind of way that might sum up this stuff? And that's when I kind of got cross-burning cops, or catechists, actually, or something like that kind of just encompasses the lawmakers of, of Catholicism or something. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, that definitely, it just depends on the type of song, maybe how busy it is or the kind of vibe I get from it or something. But that one was definitely something that was more grounded in just like straight ahead terms. And it just felt like was the way to go, rather than busying it up with all this like text and, other types of imagery. So kept it simple.
Is there a way of like making sure that the lyrics are generally like accessible, but have these kind of words that, again, like if fans were to read the lyrics, could easily kind of look up and still kind of get the overarching message of a song?
Yeah, for sure. I don't really think too much about trying to I don't overthink it so much. Like I just, whatever sort of comes out. And I think when I do write them, there is kind of a natural balance between that. If like my main goal is to communicate the sincerity, that of like the idea, like this is something that's really important to this viewpoint. But I like to present it in a certain way, which, like, as I mentioned earlier, doesn't like make it too explicit or too like shoving it down people's throats. Like there's just, you could say fuck the system or something like that, but there's like more nuanced ways of going about it, and maybe kind of present a picture that will kind of lay out, like in The Eaters and the Eaten, which kind of, it just asks basic questions like, is this what we're to think that a human life is worth when you talk about, wage labor, especially in the global South? So just by asking questions, I do tend to ask like questions like that, just put it in a basic term and to make people think maybe a little bit more about it if they want to. So that's how it goes, I guess.
Well, another pattern that we looked at is just your use of perspective. So although all your albums involve the first person singular, like I, me, my, and the plural we, us, our perspectives, we noted a slight preference for we over I. So even beginning with your first EP, we have like 4 instances of I, but 7 instances of we. On Retaliate, you have 9 instances each of I and my, but 14 instances of we. And 17 instances of our. Then on Discordia, you have 7 instances of I and my, but 8 instances of we, 14 instances of our. And on Traders, you have only 3 instances of I, no, my, and 17 instances of we, 14 instances of our. Heirs to Thievery features 7 instances of I, 13 instances of we, 9 instances of our. Rituals of Power includes 13 instances of I, but 25 instances of we, 7 instances of our. And then finally, complete control has 4 instances of I, 3 instances of my, but slightly more we or our, with 5 and 8 instances respectively. The only album that doesn't follow this general pattern of the more kind of first person plural over the first person singular is The Killing Gods, which has 23 instances of I, 12 instances of my, but only 11 instances each of we and our. Is this a pattern that you're aware of, first of all?
Slightly. I'm impressed with the calculation. But yeah, I do make explicit choices in a lot of songs to emphasize the we, to give it a kind of collective, to emphasize the social component of all the lyrics, in the sense that we already live in a kind of hyper individualistic society, and a lot of things we do are perceived like individually, and we often feel like, I just wanted to emphasize that a lot of these themes are very much collective and they impact everyone, and this is something which is in our general social interest. So that's always in the back of my head. Sometimes I do like on the new album, the song Complete Control is from the person's perspective, because it's about one individual's kind of like awakening or social consciousness about how the tentacles of power are very much not just through force, but it's also through everyday habits, the way society's structured that kind of push us into certain ways of thinking and doing. So it's I guess it's the inner socialist in me that kind of like concentrates on the collective good. But the one exemption you mentioned with The Killing, I could see that because it does have the 4 song mini concept piece that as I talked about is kind of like the Faust parable, take on modernity. So I think it's from the perspective of the Faust character, who probably does a lot of me, my, I can do something, I must know it, whatever that.
Yeah.
So I can see how that album might be might throw the statistics off a bit.
Is the I, we in these songs generally you / like the people that you are either like see yourself allied with or trying to kind of put your make as the protagonist or call to arms, whatever, or are there times where the I is like someone you're telling a story about who is kind of the protagonist you're viewing the tale through the eyes of?
I'd say maybe 90% of the time, yeah, it's just a character that I'm kind of putting there to kind of use as an example, a vehicle to talk about whatever theme the lyrics are about. There have been like a few instances through the years where I've like kind of just talked about from my perspective, maybe on a more personal level, but it's just kind of veiled, I guess, a little bit. But yeah, it's almost always like a character, I guess, I'm thinking about.
Okay. Have you told like stories about yourself ever in these lyrics, hidden in a way?
Yeah, there's a couple. I think My Untold Apocalypse was personal. It's like an early song, and then there was a song on Discordia called Sensory Deprivation, I think, which was personal. But other than those two, I can't think of too many more.
Okay, so it is quite rare.
Yeah, I never really saw the band of the lyrics as like some way for personal, vehicle for personal expression of, I don't know, like my own trials and tribulations or angst. I don't know.
So the goal then generally is more of a kind of the collective, the union, the group, sort of against the I guess the few,
yeah,
the
I mean
oppressor.
that's I mean, if you in those general terms, yes. Like it does bounce around like we, as you mentioned, like the historical subject stuff and other things. But yeah, I mean, I just see us in a within that kind of hardcore punk, crust punk tradition, and directly back to Napalm Death. That's where, they're like the kings of and our biggest inspiration.
Okay. Another kind of clear pattern that we saw with pronouns is the use of you in your albums, to the extent that your actually appears sometimes more frequently than we. So for instance, going back to the EP, you have 4 and 15 instances of you and your respectively. On Retaliate, it's 1921. On Traders, there's 1935, so 35 yours, 19 yous. Hairs to Thievery is 1728. And these are all in cases where the numbers are higher than the we, our, the I pairs. What impact do you think the you or your kind of has on the listener? And is it supposed to be directed to the listener? Like, is you the listener, or is it a specific entity that you are kind of referring to most of the time?
The man.
The man, yeah.
No, yeah, it's like always the mysterious other who's like keeping us down.
Mhm.
No, it's like, I mean, yeah, like kind of like indirectly, but without like looking at each individual case, it's hard I can't make a real general statement, but usually it's usually directed at some oppressive form of oppressive system, or mechanism, which is of, or power centralized or something like that, whether it's in, it's a government or, an economic system, or, anything in that sort of direction. So, it's not, that's usually what it is. I mean, it's kind of hard. I can't really make a blanket statement on it, but I'm guessing, yeah, it is something, like the man in a sense.
It's like when you're on stage singing and in front of an audience, do you feel more like the audience, you're singing to the audience when you use we, or when you use you? Like, is the audience ever the you that you're talking to, or are they more someone that you want to be involved with as kind of the protagonist, the speaker?
To me, the we is always the most important. That's like especially in the live setting, we have the collective feeling of like the music, creating the music and the audience and the kind of the spirit we had together, like all that stuff kind of, when I'm screaming something about we and us, it's definitely like trying to capture that collective like energy and spirit and direct it towards, what might be frustrating people, or, might be seeking some kind of temporary relief from, by attending the concert and kind of having a bit of escape for a moment. But yeah, I mean, the use, like, again, it's hard, like, I can't really say like in general, but yeah, when I'm speaking about that, I think that, whatever song it happens to be, I think that if someone out there knows the lyrics and they they hear us screaming them, then I think they're gonna know who we're talking about. It's not them. It's like,
well, this is
it's usually they.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the
Like
thing,
in
right?
Infiltrators, once more, they will know what it means to live in fear.
Yeah, well, that was a kind of additional question that I had in my mind, was that like there does seem like, if you look at the kind of patterns in your pronominal choices across the albums, this kind of like almost adversarial relationship that kind of comes up between like the I, the we, and our, versus like you, them, which maybe I think adds credence to your kind of general assessment or analysis of your use of these pronouns to kind of address the difference between the experience of, the majority who are like oppressed under this kind of privileged minority. Is that, I suppose, like one way that of like assessing this kind of overarching pattern that reads accurate to you?
Yeah, they are adversarial. I think that there's a, to me, I mean, I follow a kind of dialectical interpretation of history, and that, the clash of competing interests is what, forwards history, what forwards change ultimately. It's a very materialist perspective. It's kind of, so when I talk about adversaries and these types of things, it's about, talking about the clash of thesis and antithesis, and like this is what how change is made, and hopefully for the better. So that's kind of like the broader philosophical basis for it, I guess. But yeah, I mean, that's that's at its core. That's like what what's being presented. If it resonates with people, I don't know, but
Okay. So one thing that we found not as common as the yous and the we's though is that you do have a smattering of non-English lyrics throughout your band's history. For instance, there are several lines in German in the song. I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of all of this, so I apologize to everyone listening and you. Angst ist die Seele auf, fear eats the soul, which seemed to reference a West German film from 1974 about a romance between an elderly German woman and a Moroccan migrant worker. And they also have more German lines on the calling from the killing gods, specifically transformation within my soul. Mein Seele ist verkauft. Transformation begets the toll. Virenzwangses zar in voler. And then you also have lines in Spanish. El Dia de los Muertos, Dia de los Muertos, Bora la Memoria, Rehue al Traidor, sin remordimiento ni recor cara a cara con la realidad, on Day of the Dead off Heirs of Thievery, and La Única Esperanza off Traitors. And you also have a few instances of Latin, like on Demand the Impossible from Retaliate, the final line is Via Victis, or Woe to the Conquered. And in the Choir Invisible from Rituals to Power, their lines Nameless, Namenlos, Unknown, Innominado, Not, which seem to repeat the English words in the Latin. What does the inclusion of these non-English words, phrases add to these songs in your mind? How do you expect the audience to kind of engage with this use of non-English lyrics in otherwise English language songs?
That's more hot sauce for me. That's more spice. It's kind of another way of like elevating them and kind of giving them a little bit of something different. That's a way also of acknowledging that although English is a dominant world language, that there are other languages and other ways of like expressing things in different languages, and it just it just comes at certain moments. Angst ist die Seele auf. I just always loved it as a phrase. It means fear eats the soul. So it's kind of that song kind of deals with like the fear of the other and racism and how pointless it is, and the other ones, the Faust stuff, of course, comes from the German Faust, from the actual text, and I think in parts that Mark put in there, 24 Jahre in full, like 24 years in total, I think it means. And like in the Choir Invisible references, I just wanted to say unknown, like in different languages. I just thought it would resonate more. I mean, it's just something, a way of a different way of expressing it that kind of adds like another layer of imagery to it, I guess.
To absolutely torture this hot sauce metaphor, is like the flavor of German and Spanish and Latin, like the hot sauce flavor, different? Like, do they add different effects?
Yeah, I guess we've always had a strong connection with Germany because, like, I think Germany is where we do the best. Actually, we when we tour, we get the best crowds in Germany, and that's where some of our biggest like fan base is. So that's kind of like throwing a little bone, I guess, to acknowledgement to our fans there, and in Spanish as well as as a global language, and I've just some of those phrases have creeped in, and La Única Esperanza, and it's just, I don't know, just when I was writing the lyrics, it's just something that came to me and just and fell in with it. So
those languages feel metal at all in ways that like others don't? Like, say, you've got German, Spanish, and Latin. Latin and metal, of course, is quite a common phenomenon. could you replace them with, say, I don't know, Chinese, Swahili, and French, and still have the same impact you're going for? Or do those languages have a specific sound that you feel fits metal, or even just fits kind of Misery Index's sound?
Yeah, I mean, sure, any language could possibly be, useful or interesting. It's just, I just know I had studied German, so it was just kind of like easy for me to pull some phrases,
Sure.
I guess.
Yeah.
And Spanish is all, even though I don't really speak Spanish, it's always been around me, and grew up in the US and have a lot of friends. So it's just kind of those are just the ones I happened upon. But of course, yeah, it could be, any language from Urdu to, I don't know, to Finnish.
Yeah. Okay.
And so in those cases, have you so you said that in one case, obviously Mark wrote the lyrics there, but in those cases, are you generally writing the lyrics yourself in the non-English languages?
Yeah, the phrases we brought in, yeah, I've
Okay.
put them there. Mark usually writes at least 1 or 2 songs on a record. He has 1 on the new album, but on the Killing Gods, he wrote the whole Faust story. So that was almost half the album. But in general, though, I usually write almost all the lyrics, I'd say.
I suppose we were just wondering if you kind of drew the non-English lyrics from some other source directly, like quoting,
like the film name.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I actually saw that movie, and it kind of stuck with me. So when I thought about it at the time, I wanted to have a song that was kind of like an anti-racist kind of track. I thought I could call it Theory to Soul, or I could say Angst ist die Seele auf, and it just has more substance. I don't know. It's it goes back to something which is personal to me, the film that I saw.
I'm gonna hop in with a painfully academic question, and if the answer is no, just say no, and that's fine. But I'm just curious, if you think deep in your mind, is in using these non-English languages, is there any subtle pushback against kind of the historical dominance of English in metal, despite metal being, an incredibly international subculture and scene?
Yeah, it's possible. I've always been internationally minded, and I've always been interested in other ways of thinking, other ways of doing and knowing and interpreting things. And I just, I've never, I don't take for granted the fact that, being a native English speaker, it's a lot easier for us to navigate our professional and artistic careers internationally. So yeah, I mean, if it's not out of the realm of possibility that we would try to sing if we could. And there's a lot of, going back to what we were talking about with how on extreme metal and death metal and black metal, etc., that a lot of the times the lyrics you can't understand them a lot of the times anyway. So the music kind of takes precedence, and when you have some popular bands who sing in their own language and do fine, like Rammstein and a lot of Norwegian black metal bands and things like that. So I mean, there's a lot of space there. It's I think I think the dominance of English in metal is probably rooted in the dominance of English in rock music in general and rock history.
Yeah.
Rock came out of England and the United States. It's a distinctively Anglo-American kind of creation, a specific time in history. And metal is just, if you follow the tree back to that, it's it's still rooted in that kind of, especially 70s blues, blue collar kind of life in in the US and in UK and Birmingham and places like that, kind of solidified that kind of Anglo-American white working class roots of metal, I guess. And though that's where it's been born, it's, been taken up by the world. And in recent years, you've seen it being, reinterpreted in a lot of different countries and different languages too. So I don't think it's inevitably going to stay that way. I think there's going to be, it's going to change and morph and into, as it disperses and it's taken up in different cultures. I don't know if it's going to just, dethrone the dominance of English, but I think there's going to be a lot of more other interesting takes on it.
For sure.
So you do use a lot of questions in your lyrics. That's something you mentioned earlier, but we wanted to kind of ask a more specific question about this. So from another dream falls out of sight, and what have we now to what have we to show for this, on your first album, to the sequence, who yearns to breathe this acrid acid air, who among us bleeds for a better life beyond despair, on the new album. You average about 12.28 questions per record so far, so more than one per song. That works out to be. So what effect does asking questions have in a song for you? And what is a listener who obviously, can't respond supposed to do with these kind of questions?
Yeah, just, as I mentioned when I first brought it up, it's kind of like something that I always felt like it just presents, the idea in a way which when you present it as a question, it's like kind of, it's much better than simply like saying something in an attempt to convince someone of something, or hammer it down their throat by saying, we got to do this and that, let's do this and that. And it's when you ask basic core questions about about what is about basic value questions, what is this a good thing for humanity, or is this a path we really want to go down? Is this something that benefits everyone? Is this how are we supposed to feel about this? It's I think those are more powerful, more interesting ways to present some of the ideas. It might be seen to be some critics might say it's less, it kind of doesn't have the kind of teeth or bite that a harsher criticism might have. I don't know, but I think the criticisms are there and they're just as equally harsh. But I think the use of the question is something that, it's just my approach. I guess it's my own philosophy. I don't know. I think it works better for, rather than initiating confrontation directly, it opens I don't know, people, it's better to open up thought and ideas and to get people maybe self-reflectively asking some of the questions. If they want to go about it and read the lyrics and they're maybe sitting there checking them out as the music's going or something, I just think it's something that works. It works better for me too, expressively. I just think I don't know, when the statement like that appears in the song, it's just, I don't know, it carries more weight for me, I guess, than it's just something that as a kind of expressive tool, or a mechanism of using the words. And I don't know, it's just my method, I guess.
So on the topic of this method, we noted an interesting contrast over your second to last album, Rituals of Power, and the newest album, because Rituals of Power has 20 questions, which is the highest of any release you've ever done. And this is in part due to the repeating section on New Salem that goes, do you fight the good fight or instigate the fighting? But it still has 14 non-repeating uses, so above the average for your releases. In contrast, though, the newest album has 10 questions, which is the second lowest you've ever done, except for 9 on 2008's Traders. And the questions are only found in the first 3 songs. Once you get to track 4, there's no questions at all. Is this just pure chance, or did something happen with this new album that caused a drop in this technique of yours?
It must. I mean, I've definitely not ever thought about it until right now. So
okay.
It's something, I mean, for sure, it's all just comes what it is. And, the music's written, the lyrics are written to the music, the the track order is set based on how the feel of the songs go. So it's, those are it's just by chance for sure. I mean,
Okay.
there wasn't anything conscious there about how it all comes out.
Okay. Yeah. I figure, with this many questions, at least one of them is just going to be chance. So that's good. Yeah, we found it. That's good.
And earlier you mentioned that you really like to engage with wordplay, and that's something that we certainly saw in a lot of the lyrics of all your releases, because there's pretty consistent presence of rhyming schemes. In fact, I think every song from the EP to your latest album includes at least one instances of rhyme. So in many cases, the rhyme is also paired with alliteration, and this is most clearly seen on the track Reciprocal Repulsion, which obviously starts with some alliteration, where you have lines like victor and vanquished, spew vitriol through the air, reciprocal repulsion, a zero-sum end, victor and vanquished, spit venom and despair, reciprocal repulsion, zero-sum end. To give another example, Administer the Dagger features the lines, wealth ingests wealth as you swallow our lies, each will disdain what the other decries, the other preserves what the order prescribes, and we, the sinister, administer the dagger. Difficult to get out of the mouth at this stage. So yeah, what motivated you to kind of consistently integrate both rhyme and alliteration into just about every one of your songs, and what kind of effect do you think this generates for the listener?
It's just the color. It's just like that's the the substance, which I love about of poetry and well written, kind of like the classic English poets that would use a lot of that, and I just love the the way it flows. It gives it's like in a palette. Language is like the how you can bring like a lot of color to it, and how you can draw out the imagery, and alliteration and rhyme is like, those are like my favorite aspects of good lyrics. That what I find the most interesting. Of course, you don't have to have those, but to me, that's especially like that. To me, is like when I sit down to write lyrics, that's like the challenge, is like coming up with that kind of play, and like what I find most exciting.
It's always, I guess, interested me that we've talked to a lot of artists that use rhyme and really enjoy rhyme. And it's very interesting to see these sort of aspects of traditional poetics and traditional images of what is beautiful language come up in a genre which is on paper very non-traditional in the beauty that it tries to get out of art. Why do you think I guess extreme metal goes back to rhyme, given that it's on paper and not just on paper, in real life, emphasizes the kind of the transgression and the rejection of the barred gates of high art in a way?
I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, I can only just say that that's like that kind of classical English literature is kind of like what I was drawn to in my formative years, and I guess it stuck with me. Even as I perform this extreme kind of transgressive sonically, like music, and I put words to it. That's kind of like what I fall back on, I guess. And it's just like what I always enjoyed about reading lyrics when I was a kid. So I've kind of like latched onto that, I guess. And but it's yeah, I mean, there's a lot out there though too. I mean, there's a lot of lyrics that are a lot less classically inspired, I guess, and some but it's just the way I like to work with it, I guess. And
cool. Well, one thing we noticed that you seem to not like to work with so much in your lyrics is swearing, because there's quite a minimal amount throughout your catalog. There's generally like a handful of fucks on every album. The EP has 2, Discordia has 1, Heresy Thievery has 5, Rituals of Power has 5, but they all appear on one song. And then Traitors is the most with 9, but 4 are again in one song, Arbiter. And then there's just one instance of shit on Traitors, Heresy Thievery, and Complete Control. And you have no swearing at all, not even a single word on Retaliate or The Killing Gods. Is swearing something that you feel you kind of consciously avoid, or is it just something that kind of happened naturally, despite the kind of anger, I suppose, and protesting kind of nature of the songs that you write?
I guess it's used, sparingly. It might creep in every now and then. I know on the new album there's this one, I think, but it's not even printed in the lyrics. It's just said in the song. But yeah, I didn't really think about it. I guess it's never really thought it was necessary or something that was like needed to be employed, I guess, to emphasize the point or reinforce some of the anger. But I don't think there's anything wrong with it, or if it's if it's needed, or if it's like something that comes out as in expressing the lyrics, it's perfectly valid. But it just never creeped in, I guess, as like a main theme for me, or a tool.
Would it like detract from the kind of poetic and like word playful effect that you generally try to create with your lyrics if you were to include a lot more swearing?
I don't know. I guess if it was used right, it could work. But I just never felt the need, and it never seemed to fall in there. So it's not in the forefront, I guess. But
so how do you
I don't
define
think it
then
would
when it's
detract.
appropriate? Like like how do you find when it fits and when it's unnecessary?
Well, the only time we use it on the new album on Complete Control is in that one you mentioned before, Infiltrators, the kind of hardcore type song where the lyrics are kind of straightforward. On the lyrics in the printed version, it says behind concrete walls, the worst among them hide. Once more, they will know what it means to live in fear. But on the album, actually, so what it means to live in fucking fear. But it wasn't printed in the lyrics. But just when I was saying it, I was recording it for the album, having that extra 2 syllables in there really hammered it home, and just saying fucking fear. It was just like a way to emphasize it. And I thought that was very appropriate. It felt like it needed that.
Kind of works in alliteration too, huh?
Yeah, it's a very pissed off kind of anti-fascist kind of like anthem for us. So we wanted to like, that's the one point where it just kind of naturally came out. Because I could have said what it means to live in fear, or what it means to live in fucking fear, right on the beat. So it was like way to emphasize it. So that came out there, and it wasn't in the original lyrics, but like I said, when I was recording it, it just kind of made an appearance.
Okay. And before we get to the final question, we want to ask you about perhaps what is one of the oddest songs you've written in your catalog, lyrically, the one that I suppose departs most from the norm, and that is a Japanese bonus track called "The Devil's Onion Ring," where you write about what appears to be shitting your pants via "Don't lose this burning desire, gonna feel that ass on fire," and you incorporate the Fred Flintstone line "Yabba Dabba Doo" multiple times. I guess we want to ask what was going on with this song. What was it like to write a song like this? Yeah, and was it
well, for those who are unfamiliar, the labels usually always request the Japanese bonus track because the CDs are so expensive there that generally they won't buy them unless there's like some sort of added value component. We were told. So usually you have to come up with like one extra something for that release. And for that one, we didn't have one. We didn't have a song. And it was like last minute, but there's actually other I wasn't even involved in that song.
Oh, okay.
It was just some mutual friends who had a joke song, which they played sometimes in a rehearsal space together. And it was this other guy that came in. It was his song, his joke lyrics or whatever. And they're just perfectly meaningless. And it's just a basic kind of rock song. And it's just something which or they threw down in a minute at the end of the recording session for the Japanese bonus track. And as far as we know, it's like, that's the only appearance it's made. So I think it might be on YouTube but it's not really our song, and it's not
Okay.
intended to be anything connected with us. It's just kind of a pure joke, obviously.
Have you ever performed it live?
Yeah, one time, like as a encore, like the other guys' friends came up on stage. It was just kind of a joke, kind of like last song kind of thing.
Okay.
But that was the one and only time.
Interesting. So I suppose that brings us to our final question, which is what do you feel is the general kind of like role of language and lyrics in Misery Index's music? And if you were to speak of the, you know, realm of extreme metal more broadly, yeah, what is again like the influence and input that language offers?
Well, for me, it's that's when I, after all the music's written, and we have this like open slate, of all the music, and there's that writing, that moment, like writing the text. That's like one of the most exciting points for me, because like, as I've talked about, like lyrics are just the I don't know, I guess I might even get more out of that, like as far as personal fulfillment than writing the riffs even.
Oh,
It's
wow.
kind of like the when I get to go into myself and get really expressive and talk about, when you get up and read the news every day, it can weigh on you, and there's a lot of negativity, and it's just like a way of channeling all that out. And when it comes time to put the lyrics down, that's when it I can draw on all those kind of like influences and capture them and channel them into the the means, use it as a means of criticism, as I've talked about, and also a means of what I hope is like a kind of positive take on, like a positive kind of way of criticism. I've always kind of had this mantra: pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. This goes back to Gramsci, I think, and I've always thought that was a good way to approach things. Have a critical bite, but also have some sort of like hope in it, and like a positive component to it, that things might be better. So that's kind of like, it's a very fulfilling thing for me. It's like, working with language and painting that picture or whatever. that's the primary means of fulfillment, for sure. And if other people like it and can find something that resonates in there, that's even better.
So do you think, like, without the lyrics, that bit of hope you're talking about is something that would kind of be missing from like extreme metal, or even just Misery Index? Like, is it, given how the music obviously at face value is dark and dour and angry, is lyrics the only way that kind of maybe hope comes through?
No, I think it does in the music as well.
Mm.
I think when you use like some of the more melancholic kind of melodic passages we have, there's kind of a burning kind of hope in there. I don't know. We get that from punk as well. I think there's there's always that kind of like the driving kind of anger that's like, it's anger, but it's, of course, there's all different kinds of punk, but in some of the hardcore crust punk stuff that I really like, that's where I found like a lot of hope for a better way of life for, if not today, then for our children or what have you. I don't know. It's, yeah, it resonates. And when it all kind of coalesces and comes together, like with the music and the lyrics work well together, and it's a good kind of interplay, that's when it really reaches its most impactful, I think.
Awesome.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for persevering through our very detailed questions and recalling facts about your lyric writing process from
2 decades
15,
ago.
20 years ago. Yeah. We really appreciate the effort.
Oh, thank you. I've never been so self-reflexive on all the lyrics and the process and everything. So it's kind of made me think about things, for sure.
So if you obviously have the new album came out quite recently, but can people expect anything else next bit, or you have anything coming up? Where can people go to listen to more of the music?
Yeah, miseryindex.com. That's like the home launch point for everything. And new music maybe next year. We've already started writing, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, the new album just came out like 3-4 months ago, so we're still kind of on that right now. But
Any tours planned?
yeah, we just finished up the festival run in Europe. We're gonna do a couple more in November, one in Denmark, one in the UK, Damnation Fest in Manchester, and then next year we'll see what it brings.
Awesome. Well, we'll leave the website link in our description for anyone who wants to check out Misery Index and see what you're up to.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right.
Yeah,
You're
thanks a
welcome.
lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Right on. Thank you
Take
both. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Lingua Italica. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you stay tuned for our next episode. Before we leave, we just wanted to acknowledge that this podcast is recorded on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging.